Well, this is that 3412.
Okay.
There's the two heads from that. Chris, can I show him his Caterpillar block?
A lot of people don't stop to think how many times this engine turns. Now, just as a general rule, you can say that at 60 miles an hour in high gear going down the highway, the engine is turning 2,000 RPMs. That engine turns 2,000 revolutions for every mile. And that adds up pretty high.
A lot of times, these truck engines that we do are rebuilt multiple times. And when they get rebuilt to the point where they cannot be rebuilt anymore, they bring them to us. And that's what we do as a specialty. And that's what I do as a specialty. Is when somebody has butchered a block or taken it to its limits, I bring it back to the original form. And we start all over again. It's part of the trade.
This is the original block, but we can't fix it. See, it's busted right there. If the hole was up here, we could fix it. But right there, we can't fix that.
Actually, the engine, rebuilding an engine today doesn't require near as much machine work as it did years ago. When I first started, we used to put a Babbitt in the block and then machine the bearings, and there was a lot more machine work then than there is now.
Here's the pin bushings for this Ford.
My dad has, for as long as I can remember, my dad worked in a shop. He did different shops and he did different things, but that's always what he's done.
Here's all some of there's pistons and other stuff there. Like I said, all I gotta do is round up. We can start getting it together. So with those three pieces, we can get the engine almost all the way together before we really need that.
I tell you what probably surprised you, but when I was a kid, when I was 6, 7 years old, I knew a guy who was still a veteran from the Civil War. I knew a veteran from the Civil War. That makes me feel kind of old.
My dad grew up on a farm outside of Charleston, Arkansas. It was a 100-acre farm. And as far as I know, he never left the county he was born in until he went to work in a machine shop that was owned by his brother-in-law, his sister's husband, Tony Hugg.
I liked working in a machine shop better than I did farming. And of course, the main reason was that I knew I would be going into the Army, and I wanted to get some experience in something besides farming before I went into the Army.
He worked at the machine shop for a while until he got drafted.
I was 19 when I went in. One guy, the one that went in with us, was killed over in Germany.
I had written to him before I met him. He came into Fort Leonard Wood on a weekend to visit his cousin. And we ended up going to Forest Park. And he always tells everybody he met me at the zoo.
I didn't meet her at the zoo, but then it sounds better.
In June of 46, we got married.
When my mom and dad were first together, they were down on the riverfront with my mom's cousin, Virginia Ashenfelter, and her, I can't remember if they were married at the time, her husband or boyfriend, and went down to the Mississippi riverfront to see the riverboat, the Admiral.
there's a guy selling balloons, and he had a big bunch of helium balloons, and he's selling balloons. And Ashenfelter picked up a pebble and tried to flick it at the balloons. Dad said, "You're doing that all wrong." Typical Dad. That ain't how you shoot a pebble. "Oh, well, if you know so much, show me how." So Dad picks up a pebble, pow, fires it off, pops a balloon. This guy comes running over, gets all pissed off, starts screaming at Dad, and a fight ensues. And this big guy, you know, Dad's, hell, we're all small, you know. But this pretty big guy, and he climbs all over Dad, and this fight starts. There's a lot of rolling around in the gravel going on. And Virginia Ashenfelter says, "Jim, get in there and help Francis." And Ashenfelter says, "You're not paying attention. Francis doesn't need any help."
I got pregnant, so Fran borrowed $500, and we thought, my God, it's the whole world's debt, you know. We found this little house on Alabama and put that money down on it, and we moved in on the second floor.
For 4 years I worked for one company, and I worked 50 hours a week. And I thought I was special because I was getting to work overtime. I thought that was, you know, that was really great, because I mean, I got time and a half for that. I thought I was special to get that. The company I was working with was kind of halfway going out of business, and I either had to open my own shop or go to work for somebody else. And so the little shop on Alabama Avenue.
Minden Automotive, 8307 Alabama Avenue. You see him in the morning, we got up to go to school, he'd eat a bowl of cereal and take off.
We lived so close to there that he would come home for lunch, you know, and that.
And I can remember traveling that crooked old path back and forth between the house and the shop.
There used to be a Texaco station up in front facing Alabama, and then Dad had a repair shop in the back there.
That's when I used to run parts for him, go downtown to all these service places that sold nothing but the rings, pistons, valves, gaskets.
She would, you know, she went down there or whatever, we'd all have to go down with her. And we'd always stand in the front of the shop. We really didn't venture back into where the cars were, because at that time he would pull cars into his garage and everything. So we didn't really go venturing back into where all the stuff was. And the reason I didn't go back into any of that was he had this peanut machine in the front of the store.
And I used to take Kevin with me, and little blonde towhead, you know, he'd come in there. He had them guys wrapped around his finger. He'd just stand there, and all of a sudden they'd go put money in a nickel in a peanut machine, you know. And he'd open his pockets up, and they'd just dump peanuts in here, and he'd have jelly beans in this pocket. God.
Me and Bud both started out with Dad when we were kids, you know, when he had his own business.
Well, in the kindergarten years, I remember mostly just playing around. Later on, it was sweeping the floor, washing off parts, grinding valves. Then I had to stand on a wooden soda crate to reach the equipment. He had a 1950 black Plymouth Coupe. It was a flathead 6-cylinder engine, and he showed me how to charge up a condenser from the distributor, and you build up a pretty good charge and you could shock someone. And I was going to take it back to school, walking up the street and shock one of my friends, and stuck it in my pocket and shocked myself.
That son of a bitch worked 18 hours a day, every fucking day.
Summer nights I can remember being down there, doors open, baseball games on radio, pushing 10 o'clock at night or so.
Except Saturdays. Saturdays he'd get home about 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, fuck, it's like a holiday. You know, the old man's home from work. Saturday nights, go down to Dan Reedy's and get a 6-pack of Coke and a bag of rolled gold pretzels and watch Gunsmoke.
Then we'd each get a soda and open up the bag of rolled gold pretzels, and that was high times on a Saturday night.
The earliest I remember is taking the blue highways down to Arkansas. His vacation was to go down to the farm and help with the harvest or whatever.
I remember the big field out in front of the house leading from the county road, the dirt county road up to the house. The barn, path to the pond and the cows. The tin roof when it would rain.
Well, Dad would take all the kids out to the watermelon patch. Every kid could pick their own watermelon. So Dad would help us haul them all back, you know, to the cold storage thing, you know, in the ground and that. And that's what he did on his days off. He probably wished he was working.
National Auto Supply bought the property that I was on, and they offered to buy me out and let me run the shop. They'd buy some new equipment. I could run the shop for them on a percentage basis.
National bought all that property and tore down the repair shop and the gas station and put National Auto Supply there.
The first place I remember my dad working was National Auto Parts. And Minden Automotive was before my time, but I remember very clearly him working at National. And it was about the time that my brother Danny worked there.
When I got in high school, when I was 16, I got a job working for National. I was the ports guy. Then Dad said, you know, he was going back to work. He'd come home, eat supper, go back to work. That's when he taught me the machinist trade. And that's when, you know, I learned everything about machine shop from Dad. But then I got drafted, so it all went right up the river back in the 60s, a long time ago.
People that have the ability and the knowledge to do the work good can usually make more money doing something else.
Frank, my oldest brother, was on to bigger and better things.
I still enjoyed that kind of work. Somewhere along the line when I was in high school, I got interested in the chemistry, metallurgy aspects of engineering and wanted to pursue that, and never really thought about a trade anymore.
Danny had the talent for it, he didn't have the demeanor for it.
When I went down there, I realized Dad, it was in a whole new ball game, you know, compared to what we did at National. He wanted to pick, you know, redo a head. At his old shop, you know, you picked it up, you threw it on the bench and worked on it. His new shop, you had to pick everything up with hoists to work on it. I said, this ain't for me, this is too much like work. I got a real job at the post office.
I didn't like the oil and the grease. It always scared me. I mean, even going to the shop at Minden Automotive. Because I'd walk in there and it was just like astounding to see all the stuff laying around. And to know that it was taken apart and somebody had to put it back together and not have pieces left over.
Tom is clearly the most skilled laborer among us. He's the closest in terms of being able to work with his hands and being a carpenter.
I did some work at their house, and I put a chink in one of my wood chisels, put a chink in the blade. He has got a bench grinder down there in the basement, so I went down there and I'm grinding this thing out, and I'm grinding on it for a long time to get that chink out of the blade. And I finally get it good and smooth, but this thing's white hot, just smoking. I turn the grinder off, lay the chisel down. Pop walks down, walks around the corner, and picks that chisel up and throws it back down. What's the matter, Pop? Is that hot? He said, no, it doesn't take me long to look at chisels.
Kevin worked there, and he still does. He's still running the place.
When I first started, I did some stuff downstairs, not a lot, but taking stuff apart and grinding valves and doing that kind of work. I didn't hate it, but I'm not that mechanically inclined.
I may have really dodged a bullet in not working in the shop. It would have been very difficult to try and learn something that the old man is such a master at and be really bad at it. I don't know what would have been worse, being humiliated because I was really terrible at it, or disappointing him because I was really terrible at it. Jim worked there when he was younger. He started out doing various things in the shop and then was quickly demoted to running their computer system.
I never did enjoy that kind of thing. The ins and the outs of it, the engineering aspects of it were interesting, but I had a complete lack of skill. I knew what I wanted stuff to do, just wouldn't do it. Take this, hit it with a hammer, and that will fall out. No, it won't, because I just tried it and it didn't happen. I was a complete boob when it came to everything that had anything to do with tools. I've never been any good with tools. I've always understood how they work. I just can't get them to do what they're supposed to.
On the other hand, then, when I lost my scholarships and was flunking out of college, I realized that what I already knew about mechanical repair, machinery, could be effectively turned into an Army skill. I found out, I could be a mechanic on a helicopter.
When he was in Vietnam, he wrote Dad about a problem they were having with helicopters. And like so many hours on a helicopter, they had to, take it down and take the engine apart or, whatever, and check the engine out. Well, they've been trying to rebuild the engines on these helicopters, and they couldn't do it because they didn't have the tool.
A flexible jointed pin spanner wrench, and we had a hard time finding one. There was only one of these wrenches in the entire airfield where we were, and it was always loaned out to somebody else, and you could walk a mile to go to the hangar and tell them you needed that spanner wrench, and it wasn't there. Somebody else had it.
So I think it was Dad's mission to find this or build it. So he went over to Hood's, which is this kind of like store that you can find everything that's been out of stock for 10 years, and they have everything. And the problem with it is you have to go through everything to find what you want because it's like not organized. So Dad went over there, spent a Sunday afternoon going through everything, I think, at Hood's to find this. He finds it, comes home with it. On this thing it says 5. So Dad figured, you know, the government being what it was, if they had to make it or buy it or whatever, they'd probably charge $50 for the stupid thing when, you know, here he got it for 5 cents. So he sent it to Bud and put in a bill for it and changed it like $50 or whatever. He never got it.
My dad always had this group of cronies that hung out together. I guess they weren't always cronies. They got cronies. They got to be cronies as they got older. They weren't always cronies.
There was a guy at his old shop that just used to drive him crazy. His name was Fiddler. And like, you know, he was some old farmer in Illinois. And he calls Dad on a Sunday afternoon at home. And he starts telling him about this problem he's got with his car. And Dad knew exactly what was wrong with his car because it was a common problem that they had with these engines. And he tells this guy's on long distance, a cheap farmer, you know. He tells him to hold the phone out the door so he can listen to his car. And the guy does it. He tells him what's wrong with it.
It wasn't until after I was back from Vietnam and back at Rolla that he left National and went to work for the concrete company.
When I got out of service, I went back to work with Dad. Back in '68, I worked for Dad till for some reason, he went to work for Vonderhaar.
Going to Vonderhaar, I mean, you know, as an adult, I can look at it and say how that was probably a really good job decision for him. He was, you know, going to a place that he probably was making more money. I believe it was a union job, and that, you know, and all of that implies. And the most striking thing is that he didn't work Saturdays anymore. He didn't have to go to work on Saturdays.
The most difficult one I did was probably when I worked for Vonderhaar Concrete. Vonderhaar's had a big V12 Caterpillar engine that sunk in the river on a barge. It wasn't damaged, but the sand was in it, so it had to be taken apart. And a lot of stuff that on an engine, once you take it apart, after say it's run a while and you take it apart, you'd kind of disturb it, and you're better off to replace it than to try to put it back in. That was one of the worst ones I ever worked on.
The time he was working for Vonderhaar, the concrete company, was when he had the accident and lost his finger.
It's the day I got out of the Army. Went in and asked Pop then, you know, what happened.
He was working on an engine down on the river.
Merrimack River, not the Mississippi River bank.
They were putting a pin in a front loader.
But this piece of machinery was sitting on like ice because it was wintertime. It was December.
And when they had it jacked up, the hydraulic jack or something, the pin slipped and come down and just
hit right there. So he's laying there with his hand trapped underneath this equipment. They jag it back up and get him out. Stands up, brushes himself off, and this just blood and shit just running out. You know, picks his hand up, he makes a fist, and this finger falls over backwards. I get to eavesdrop on this orthopedic surgeon who just whacked off part of Dad's hand. And the guy's saying, well, you know, you had such massive trauma to the hand, we think the rest of it will come back, you know, it's crushed. And we absolutely had to cut that finger off. So, any questions that you have? because Dad's just laying there not saying anything. Any questions you have? And Dad says, will I be able to play the piano? And the surgeon goes, well, yeah, I think so. And Dad says, good. I never could before.
Like anything else, he shook it right off and tried to go back to work too soon. And this surgeon told Dad that he wanted to take this big knuckle out of here, and instead of having that big gap there, if he took the knuckle out, he would have like 3 fingers instead of that big hole. And workman's comp wouldn't pay for the operation, so Dad never had it done. You know, they gave him a big hosing on that.
I think it upset him that either he got careless or something beyond his control. Someone else that he was working with got careless, and he suffered as a result, because he was always very careful about safety in the shop. You know, like I said, he'd been doing it for a long time, and he'd never been seriously hurt.
I don't think it bothered him so much that he got hurt or that the accident happened, but that there was an environment that would allow that accident to happen. I think it really made him mad. I think it offended him.
It upset him. It pissed him off, I know. That he viewed it as a intolerable situation and arranged to buy engine rebuilders.
You know, here's a man, 50 years old, you know, still has little kids at home, and he decides to go into business for himself again. He went into business with Clarence Neese. Clarence owned engine rebuilders and was the office manager. Clarence's son, Chris, now works in the shop with my dad.
He taught me how to machine the blocks for boring them out for oversized cylinders, to run the boring bar. That was his forte. When he had his own machine shop, he would run 2 boring bars at the same time. Now, sometimes I could do that if conditions are correct, but he would have to do that in order to keep up demand.
A few years ago, my dad transferred ownership to Kevin, so Kevin runs the business now. It's his business. My dad still goes in and does stuff. I don't think he knows how to stop.
I don't think he could tell you how much money we have in the bank. He couldn't tell you. He couldn't tell you who we owe money to, how much we owe money, who owes us money. He couldn't tell you any of that, because he doesn't concern him. He don't want anything to do with ordering parts or, you know, taking care of customers, or, you know, he just wants to do machine work. That's all he ever wanted to do.
No, I've learned from experience that there's different people do things different ways, and I've learned to analyze what they're doing, and I've always managed to come up with somebody that was doing something that I liked better than the way I was doing it, and I learned something. I wasn't too bullheaded to change, but until I find some way that's better than what I do it, I'm not going to change.